On Christmas Eve 1999, a man in Fossil, Oregon died.
I was a school teacher and an athletic coach. I think I was a good coach, but I was a good coach because I was a teacher.
Bill Bowerman lived to confound people. That was part of his method, part of his teaching us. In every single different way, you just never knew what he was going to do.
William J. Bowerman was the head track coach at the University of Oregon for 24 years. He won 4 national championships, inspired 33 Olympians, coached 16 sub-4-minute milers, and revolutionized the training of distance runners.
Bill looked at all aspects of it. He said, you're leaning too far forward, you're leaning too far back, you're holding your head this way. He had the ability to tell what we needed to work on in order to improve performance with the least amount of effort.
His methods inspired greatness in young men willing to work for excellence.
You lose, and you pick yourself back up again. There isn't such a thing as losing.
He pushed you farther than you ever thought you could be pushed.
And he dedicated his life to helping them succeed.
Everything we touched, everything we ate, everything we wore, even the women we loved, he wanted to improve.
Bowerman dared to believe that sports and fitness training could benefit non-athletes too. His imagination and passion would introduce a nation to jogging. His experiments with shoes would co-found an empire.
And I've said many, many times, if there is no Bill Bowerman, there is no Phil Knight, because without him, I would be something and somebody entirely different.
If you have finished a race knowing that you have done your best, whatever it is, you're a winner. That was what he tried to instill in them.
Called by many one of the greatest track coaches in the world, Bill Bowerman was a man from Fossil, whose footprints changed the landscape of Oregon, and a teacher whose lessons burned deep.
Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Ann and Bill Swindell's Charitable Trust, the Robert C. and Nanny S. Warren Foundation, and the Oregon Cultural Trust. Thank you.
At the start of every school year, Bill Bowerman held a team picnic at his home high above the Mackenzie River and told a story about a mule.
Farmer has a mule, and the mule won't plow, the mule won't drink. Mule skinner comes, finds a 2x4 and hits the mule between the eyes. The farmer has to drag him off, and he says, that's supposed to make him plow, that's supposed to make him drink. Mule skinner says, I can see you don't know a damn thing about mules. First, you have to get their attention. Well, that was Bill. We were the mules, and getting us riled up in all those different ways was getting our attention. So, in theory, lessons could be inserted.
It was a very difficult first year with him. He believed, obviously, that you had to be fit to run distance races at the University of Oregon, and fitness required 365 days a year training. And I had come off of high school where you went out for track in the spring and didn't do anything the rest of the year. So this was a new approach, and he sent the message.
They were no longer boys, he told them. They were the men of Oregon, and they were there to be educated in all aspects of life.
First and foremost, he was very interested in developing the whole person. He appreciated if somebody could quote some Shakespeare or have a Latin phrase. For the individuals who maybe had a lot of talent, but really weren't that interested in developing the whole self, then he had less interest in them. It was very much a part of who he was.
A college student during the Great Depression, Bowerman expected each man to earn their way and found many students part-time jobs at the local lumber mills.
It was a responsible job. They had to be there, and if they weren't there, they got canned. And that's the way life works, I think.
He wanted us to learn how to be hard-working members of the community. He wanted us to have a real feeling for the whole program, the relationship with the mill owners. Bill was pioneer stock. He loved to say, hey, the cowards never started, and the weak died along the way. I guess that just leaves us, huh?
In the spring of 1845, Bill Bowerman's great-grandfather headed west, leading a wagon train across the Oregon Trail. The family eventually settled in what is now Wheeler County, where Bill's mother was born. And when they found fossils behind the homestead, that's what they called the town. Bill and his twin brother Thomas were born in 1911. His father, J. Bowerman, was a prominent Condon attorney and served briefly as acting governor of Oregon. His mother, Lizzie, was a teacher. They divorced when Bill was 2, and Thomas died that same year in a Portland elevator accident. Bill grew up forever estranged from his father.
Bill was a hellion growing up in Fossil. Bill was as rebellious as only a fatherless child could be. He ran wild in the rimrock and the hayfields. He was famous for his pranks. He was famous for running away from home. His mother couldn't do anything with him.
When the family moved to Medford, Bill's constant fighting vexed his teachers even more.
I looked on most of them as a hindrance to my expression of energy, of which I had a great abundance. And I was always being thrown out of classes, and I finally was thrown out of high school.
They wouldn't let him back in. So his brother finally arranged an appointment with the superintendent of schools, Marcel Hedrick. And Bill showed up and was asked to sit outside, and Bill squirming.
That superintendent had me sit in that office from 9 in the morning until 12:15. At that point, he says, "Is that goddamn blankety-blank hell-raising kid still out there?"
Bill goes in, they close the door. Hedrick just read him the riot act, saying, you can fight, you can die on some damn barroom floor, I could care less. The only problem with that is you're gonna dishonor a wonderful woman in the person of your mother. And that got Bill. And so he said, what should I do? And Hedrick said, you will channel that goddamn energy, and I don't ever want to hear your goddamn name again. And that was Bill's self-proclaimed lesson of his life.
Bill channeled. He was the quarterback of the football team, played in the band, and in his senior year was editor of the school paper. A straight-A student, he caught the eye of sophomore Barbara Young.
And I was very surprised when he came by my table and asked me to dance. And I drew a deep breath, and I was afraid I would go through the floor before I even got to the dance floor, but it was the most amazing thing that I ever felt. We just danced.
Barbara and Bill were married in the spring of 1936.
And the life which has unfolded has just been like a fairy tale.
As a freshman at the University of Oregon, Bowerman's first love was football.
But in the meantime, he had met Bill Hayward, who was the Oregon track coach, and who had watched him playing football. And afterwards, he said to Bill, did you hear me running along beside of you saying, get your knees up, get your knees up, get your knees up?
My running was just bad, and I didn't know it. If Bill Hayward had not tidied up my running technique, and I would never have made the track team at the University of Oregon.
As an athlete, Bowerman was fascinated by how the human body worked. He planned to be a doctor, was accepted to medical school, but couldn't afford the tuition, so he decided to teach for a couple of years first.
When Mr. Hedrick, who was the one who had brought him around from being a mischievous little nobody to an outstanding athlete, called and said, are you interested in coming to Medford, where you can coach football, basketball, and track? In fact, I want you to lay out a completely new track program.
Medford High gained a coach, and Bowerman never looked back, leading the Black Tornado to 6 state championships. When the war broke out, Bowerman was eager to serve. He joined the Army's 10th Mountain Division, where soldiers learned to fight on skis. Major Bowerman shipped out to Italy in 1944. He returned home a hero, his coaching skills in demand.
Hayward said, if you're going to stay in coaching, you'll find that you'll enjoy track a great deal more than you would football. And he was right.
In 1947, Bill Hayward retired, and Bill Bowerman accepted his mentor's position of head track coach at the University of Oregon.
He was probably the greatest influence among men in my life.
Throughout his career, Bowerman hated being called a coach. He said, "The meanest man I ever met was a football coach who insisted on being called coach." Bowerman called himself a teacher. As such, he believed every runner was an individual, and every individual learned differently.
This right here is a typical workout sheet for Bill, and this is my workout sheet for 1967.
He tailored weekly workout schedules for every man on the team, focusing on their personal needs and goals.
I wanted to run a sub-400 mile. At that time, Bill Bowerman was the only coach in the United States that had coached more than 2 sub-4-minute milers, and he'd coached 9.
Don't overtrain. In track and field, I call it the hard, easy principle. As if you work hard, you have to rest. You have to recover.
He said, you know, today's going to be an easy day. Why don't you just stride on the grass? And so I spent 30 minutes just striding up and down the football field. Walking, jogging, lightly, you know, barefooted.
To Bowerman, the now well-known hard, easy method was just common sense.
Just that common sense was diametrically opposed to what most coaches were singing at that time, which was the more you put in, the more you get out.
Many runners, accustomed to working their bodies to the bone, found Bowerman's way a tough sell, too.
I was trying to stick in little runs here and there so I could get 100 miles a week, but I was always sick and injured.
So Bowerman gave Moore an ultimatum.
He closed his big rough hands around my throat and lifted most of my weight off the ground. He said, "Mr. Moore, I'm going to ask you to take part in an experiment. For the next 3 weeks, you're going to just run easy days, and you're not going to run a step that is not in my sight." And as I was feeling faint, I had to agree. The ultimatum was that I would never run for the University of Oregon again if I didn't take part in this experiment.
3 weeks later, Moore remembers running the 2-mile against Oregon State. It was 1964.
Bill on the infield said, "He's not going to hold that. See what you can do." I started to gain. The crowd saw me, Bill's crowd, 10,000 strong for dual meets in those days. And I caught Story on the last turn, and I outkicked him and ran 8:48.1, and it was 27 seconds faster than I had ever run. And afterwards, there was Bill with this crazed grin, saying even he didn't think that I could run that fast. But fundamentally, that was the proof. That was my 2x4, that I had to take those easy days, and I'd just been wasting all that effort and not getting any improvement for it.
And he put his hands on the back of my neck and he said, "Wait," he says, "you're ready? Here's how I want you to run the race tomorrow night." And when I finished, Burleson was 3:57.5, Roscoe was 3:59.4, and I was 3:59.8. And so I had made my sub-4-minute mile. It was a great feeling, 6-year goal I'd worked at for almost every day to reach.
The greatest improvement is made by the man who works most intelligently, Bowerman would say, but most coaches fail to embrace his methods.
And the only way Bill found to get them to listen to reason was to crush them with the duck runners.
The community of Eugene was listening. Bowerman and his distance runners were drawing huge crowds to Hayward Field, and that's exactly what he wanted.
He said there's no way we can have a successful program unless the whole community is with us.
He reached out to the young professionals, the doctors, lawyers, and businessmen, taught them about track, and recruited their time and support.
They filled the stands, they became our officials, the mayor, the whole town of Eugene, the mill workers, all the way through. It was not just a university effort, it was a community-wide effort.
Bowerman solved one problem after another, especially when it came to improving his athletes' performance. And he believed the less a runner had to pack around, the better.
Every ounce that you carry, especially if it's on your feet, is 55 pounds a mile, if you're assuming 6-foot stride for a miler. Bill, being the physicist, wanted to remove weight in every possible way.
Bowerman wanted a lighter, better-fitting racing shoe.
He tried to send pictures to all the shoemakers, and nobody would have anything to do with it. He decided, well, I'm going to make my shoes myself.
At home in his workshop, Bowerman started cobbling with the lightest leathers, nylon and mesh, even rattlesnake, and tested the custom-made shoes on his runners.
My method was, of course, simplicity, and I didn't stitch them, I glued them.
The thing was that track shoes then weighed 8 or 10 ounces, and if he could get them down to 4 or 5 ounces, which he did right away, he was cutting the weight that we were running in half. And that had a real difference. That was amazingly different.
Working out on a soggy cinder track was another problem, so Bowerman started tinkering with artificial track surfaces.
We had rubber sheets all around this house. I mean, he was constructing pathways and had a big mixer and a truck that had rubber shavings and tar, and sometimes he'd be out heating it up and shoveling it out and making forms.
His early experiments would lead to some of the first all-weather tracks in Oregon. Bowerman examined every event and every piece of equipment, looking for the competitive edge. And along the way, he was teaching his students much more than track.
Even Bill Bowerman, describing himself, said, I'm not a track coach, I'm a professor of competitive response. And that meant more than just competing on the track. That competing on the track was just one of the lessons about competing in all facets of life.
He taught toughness and tenacity with a salty sense of humor on the side, often relaying his lessons in unique ways.
The famous one was to brand us with his hot keys in the sauna. He'd sit there. Once he had this big ring of keys, 180 degrees. It never really burned you so much that it left a scar, left a well, left a mark. But a few days later, it was gone. But that was his way of laying on lessons. That was welcome to the club. That was branding you as one of his own members of the team.
They loved him and hated him, called him a tyrant, and cursed his control. But he expected the best, and that offered the gift of possibility.
So he'd put that great paw of his on the back of your neck and say, great race, and that'd be about it. But that was the greatest compliment. It just meant the world to me and to almost everybody else on the team when you get that moment, which they didn't come very often.
Bowerman and the men of Oregon won their first national championship in 1962. It was to be a decade like none other on Hayward Field.
It wasn't that they won the nationals every year, but they had fantastic people, and Steve Prefontaine came in '69. It was all just great, great times running.
In 1962, Bowerman took his world record-holding relay team to New Zealand for a series of challenge races. He met coach Arthur Lydiard, who started a local running club. Jogging, as it was called, hit Bowerman right between the eyes.
I was invited to go with this group of joggers on a Sunday.
And I went about 100 yards, and I'm huffing and puffing, and
Well, they're laughing and running on ahead.
And Bill barely made it back. Barely, actually, a 70-year-old guy had to take pity on Bill and say, I know a shortcut, and get him back.
And he says, you're having a bit of trouble. I couldn't even talk.
Shocked at his own lack of fitness, 52-year-old Bowerman started jogging every day. When he returned home 6 weeks later, and 10 pounds lighter, he asked, why can't we start a jogging club in Eugene?
After about 3 weeks of Bill giving little jogging lessons, a couple of thousand people showed up. Scared him to death because he thought somebody was going to drop dead, and because they were all sedentary people.
So Bowerman the scientist teamed up with local cardiologist Waldo Harris to organize a jogging research program, applying the same training methods he used on his distance runners. He assigned the men of Oregon to lead the groups.
And the thing that was amazing about this, the very first night out, we had a guy who could not walk more than 10 yards before he had to stop. And we walked him around, took us an hour to get around the track the first night. But we did that consistently, and a year and a half later, we had him jogging a mile.
Overwhelmed with requests for fitness information, Bowerman and Harris wrote a book called Jogging in 1967. It sold more than 1 million copies, introducing the benefits of running to the average American. Jogging put Eugene on the map, and nothing could have pleased Bill Bowerman more.
I think that the research that we did on exercise for people who were out of shape and was probably the greatest contribution that I've ever made.
Around the same time, former student Phil Knight was thinking about starting an athletic shoe distribution company. He wanted Bowerman's endorsement and got a lot more.
Then he was coming up to Portland for an indoor track meet, and he basically came up and says, well, let your old coach in on the deal. And I says, okay, and we shook hands on a partnership.
Each chipped in $500, launching tiny Blue Ribbon Sports.
His interest from that moment on really was in the quality of the product and the innovation of the product.
While Bowerman designed and tested prototypes, Knight managed the company. The fitness revolution provided the customers that fueled the business. It was the perfect storm that became Nike.
We were sitting out there just ordinarily having waffles on the front deck, which we often did. So that's when he suddenly looked over at the back of the waffle iron.
I looked at the back side of that thing and I thought, Eureka, that's it.
He jumped up and went to town and got 2 cans of urethane and poured it in the waffle iron, and of course it wouldn't even come apart after that.
The shoe that really put Nike on the map was the waffle trainer, and that was really his innovation, and it came out of his thoughts on what an outer sole on a running shoe ought to look like.
As Nike grew from boutique to worldwide empire, Bowerman never lost his focus on perfection, threatening to resign countless times over design disagreements.
He was always working to get the shoes better, and he was frequently critical of the shoes and you know, of me. His criticisms really were very valuable, and we would share it with the designers, and ultimately you saw a lot of his ideas take place on the line. His thoughts and attitude towards innovation live in the company today.
Bowerman's innovative ideas would transform Eugene, Oregon, college town, into Tracktown, USA. He created a dynasty that would draw 3 Olympic trials to town, and in 1972, he coached the U.S. track team at the terror-torn Munich Olympics. Bowerman retired later that year. He and Barb returned their energy to philanthropy, providing money for university buildings and renovations, school athletic programs, and the arts. But Bowerman wasn't ready to retire from a good fight. In 1981, the followers of the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh purchased a ranch close to Fossil and across the John Day River from Bowerman's son, John. Their talk of a utopian commune quickly turned dark.
They shine spotlights in our windows at night. From 200 yards away, we could read the newspaper in the living room by them. Armed guards sat up on the hill up there.
The Rajneesh incorporated their city and bought additional land in Antelope, threatening to control the town and increase property taxes. Many longtime residents left or were forced out, and that outraged Bowerman.
Bill got involved with the Rajneesh commune because they were abusing the rights of his neighbors. And I think there was a deep part of Bill that was a protector.
He created a nonprofit organization to monitor Rajneesh activities and bankrolled much of the opposition.
Bill never asked you to overstep the boundaries, but I do remember that when I wrote my opinion on the illegality of the Rajneesh commune under the Constitution's separation of church and state clause, that he was very moved and very excited because he felt that this showed the legal basis for concerns that he'd shared for a very long time.
Under intense criminal investigation, the Bhagwan was eventually deported, the commune disbanded, and Bowerman's love for the land he grew up on was reignited.
My first recollection of anything is being in Fossil, Oregon.
Settled by Bill's ancestors more than a century before, the town of Fossil called the Bowermans back home in 1998. Bill's unsteady walk caused by nerve damage from years of breathing toxic fumes from bluing shoes. A year later, Bill died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88. A life-size statue of William J. Bowerman stands watch over Hayward Field, an inspiration for generations of runners to come.
But every single person is an individual. Every person has this life set before them, and it depends on how they use it. And he thought that that's what he was here for, to help them use it to the best of their abilities, achieving the things that we as human beings wanted to achieve.
Rejoice in Bill's way of problem solving. He gave you the power to take me from an awestruck kid gripping that fence to an Olympian of some tenacity.
He really sort of imbued that whole community with a certain spirit and feel. It's much better for his having been there. And I think that really speaks of kind of almost everybody and everything that he was in contact with. From the 10th Mountain Division to the University of Oregon to Nike.
Thank you, Bill Bowerman.
But it was never a goal to become wealthy. It was never a goal to be famous. It was only a goal to do what he loved doing. And this is the message, the moral to the whole story of Bill Bowerman.
The victory is in having done your best. If you've done your best, you've won.
There's more about Bill Bowerman on Oregon Experience Online. To learn more or to order a DVD of the show, visit opb.org. Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Ann and Bill Swindell's Charitable Trust, the Robert C. and Nanny S. Warren Foundation, and the Oregon Cultural Trust. Thank you.